I guess maybe we will go ahead and get going, and hopefully we'll see Freddy comes in as we start with introduction. So let's see, and we have all right, we have 18 people in here, so usually coming in as we start talking. So good morning, good afternoon, and hello everybody, and thank you all for joining us from your collectively remote places and more than likely your individual homes and where you're at. And welcome to this session. It's been a great conference. This is the fourth day, and actually this is the very last session. So after this session, there is this the networking and cocktail party that you guys, everybody could join with, but you need the mobile app to join it. And so my name is Fadi Bishara. I'm working with SPARK. I'm also the founder of Black Box, and I'm honored to be here with great entrepreneurs and people who are close to the situation of entrepreneur and their businesses on the ground, and people from the ecosystem who are supporting all of these efforts to help sustain and go through the crisis. And we have Freddy also joining us. So why don't we probably start with each one of you will go around and take 2-3 minutes or so to introduce yourselves. Tell us a little bit about what you do, why you're doing it, and maybe also if you could just a high level impression about how has COVID been affecting what has been some challenges that you've seen from your purview, from your point of view, and the context that you're in, and not just the challenges, or where also do you see any opportunities? Where are the opportunities, and how you're looking at the situations from now? So, Haneen, why don't we start with you, Jordan?
Sure. Good evening, good morning. Hello, everyone. My name is Haneen Khatib, and I'm the country manager at SPARK Jordan. I have been with SPARK for a little under 2 years now. And to give you an overview, we established ourselves in Jordan in 2016 as a response to the Syrian refugee issue. We have been providing support to Syrian and vulnerable host community youth in Jordan through access to health education, scholarships, as well as entrepreneurship training, coaching and mentorship, as well as support to the MSME sector. Throughout the past 4 years, we have been able to help a little over 2,500 people establish new jobs or find new jobs by supporting at least 700 MSMEs, 500 startups, and 1,000 people matched through internships to direct jobs.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Hani. Okay, Fahad, you want to go next?
Sure. Thank you very much. And thank you to everyone tuning in. My name is Fahad Daoud, and I'm a researcher and project manager at the Qatar Fund for Development. The fund is a government development agency, and we work across the humanitarian and development fields in 3 key sectors. We work in education, health, and economic development. In terms of my role personally, I spend a lot of my time in the field developing country strategies. Recently, because of flight restrictions, I'm trying to get used to a desk job, but everyone's going through changes at the moment. I also work a lot with large multilateral organizations like the United Nations. In terms of the scale of the challenge, the question that you posed, Fadi, I think it's really unprecedented and far-reaching. From a donor's perspective, though, there are sort of 2 key challenges that we saw. We see really a constraint on finances because, of course, at the moment the focus is on the humanitarian response, but I think there's sort of not been enough focus on the long-term economic effects, which will very likely be more grave. Secondly, the big challenge, of course, is access at this time. We kind of see that in 2 senses at the fund. It's a challenge to ensure access to quality kind of market-driven education at this time. Because of the lack of face-to-face learning and online education really trying to catch up with this. But then also there's sort of trouble ensuring access to the means for people to be able to innovate, find jobs and give jobs. If you want, for example, to deliver pizza, it's not enough to just have a driver's license. You need the car too. So we really see the challenges. How can you sort of ensure that job seekers and employers have the necessary access to finance to be able to facilitate this employment, which really kind of gives us the opportunities in terms of, at a really broad sense, we've been given the chance to sort of think innovatively about how to build back better after this pandemic. Because we know, of course, that this pandemic has garnered huge attention because it's so far-reaching, but in many kind of contexts, these challenges are the norm, and these kind of crises are becoming more protracted. So for that, just at a high level.
Thank you very much, there, Fahad. Freddy, it's great to see you. Great if you could join us here. Sorry for that little technical difficulties there. Do you want to go next and introduce yourself? Just and tell us also briefly, if you missed the question earlier, what from a high level, how has the COVID-19 crisis been a challenge? What has been challenging from your context and your business, and also what has been an opportunity potentially as well?
Of course, and thank you very much for inviting me. I'm hoping that you guys hear me well right now, right?
We hear you great.
Excellent. So all the technical problems are gone. My name is Freddy Vega. I am the CEO and co-founder of Platzi. Platzi is the largest technology school in Latin America. We have millions of students in 22 different countries who are learning from scratch how to get a job in the tech industry, in every single skill available in the digital economy. So we prepare people for jobs in programming, design, marketing, business. Basically, if you do it with a computer and it's a very well-paid job, we can teach it. And we have been able to take hundreds of thousands of people out of poverty at scale because of the platform that we built. The pandemic has been a very weird situation for us in terms of online education. It's kind of unfair because definitely it's a terrible humanitarian situation, as Fahad was mentioning before. But at the same time, it's like the golden era for anything related to digital transformation and innovation. Suddenly, people that would have never, ever thought of learning a full career online don't have a choice anymore, and they have to do it. So a lot of monsters of the mind suddenly disappeared just because now we have to be online or we don't have a chance to succeed and advance. That, however, brings something that I've been thinking about a lot as the answer to your question. I'm thinking that even after the pandemic, there's going to be a wider gap of inequality because right now, the only people advancing their careers or maybe even able to do a job are those that have a fast computer and a fast internet connection, which is definitely not the rule everywhere in the world. The Middle East and Latin America are very similar in that regard. Well, depends on the country, obviously. But we still have a wide gap between the people that are connected and people that are not. We are at a point in which, and I'm sure that it's going to sound like I'm exaggerating, but I will encourage you all to think about it for a second. People that have a phone with a 24/7 4G internet connection are like a different species from those that never have had a smartphone. It is impressive. People that don't really have access to a full-time internet connection are not able to access all the knowledge in the planet in real time through submarine cables and satellite connections. It is truly like we are a different species. And the pandemic will only make that gap wider. So my thinking is this is the moment where we should declare internet connectivity a human right. Otherwise, I don't see how we're going to fix this. We from Platzi are doing our best to make it easier for everybody to have access to high quality education in technology, which is an industry where titles don't really matter. What matters is what you know how to do. But there are other industries where where titles definitely matter, and other industries that lacking an internet connection will just not happen. So that's my guess. We need to declare an internet connectivity as a human right, like access to water, like access to food.
Yeah, that's a great point. Thank you very much there, Freddie. I think that's definitely the infrastructure issue is not discussed fairly and as much as it needs to in these issues. It's critical. Alex, welcome, and please introduce yourself and tell us a little bit more about yourself. You're muted, I think. You're
Yes,
muted. Okay.
Thank you. Thanks for the invite. Hello, everyone. Good morning here in San Francisco, 7 a.m. now. Good afternoon, good evening, I guess, for some of you. So I'm Alexander Torrenegra, and I've created multiple companies that are in the business of matching talent with demand for that talent for jobs. And the most recent one, Torre, it's one where we realized that there was a huge gap in terms of the opportunities out there for people to work remotely and the talent that could tap into those opportunities. It's my belief that most of the talent out there is going to waste because it's never exposed to the right opportunities. So since 2018, we have been working on that, and we also realized that a lot of automation is going to end up coming to the industry. So instead of the resume, we have something that we call the professional genome, which is a collection of a lot of different information about you that allows us not only to predict if you're going to be a good match for a job, but also we're starting to work on algorithms and machine learning to predict if you're going to be a good match for a team, and if the team is also going to be a good match for you, among other things. So for years, I have had remote teams since 2002, before video conferencing was a thing, and I became an evangelist and of the topic. In fact, I'm going to be publishing a book in a few weeks about the why and how of building remote teams. And out of a sudden, what I expected was going to take around one full generation, 20 years to happen. At the end of February, the very first few days of March, Twitter, I live next to Twitter, it was the first company in the US that told people, go home. I don't want you to come to an office while we have a pandemic. Within 2 weeks, every single company in San Francisco had done the same, and then the city was the first city in the U.S. asking people to stay at home. Last week, Twitter, also leading the way, was the first large company announcing they are never going to go back to an office. They are a fully remote company, and it's within a few days, several dozen CEOs of companies with thousands of employees say the same. We are going to go fully remote. The implications of that, the pandemic has had many negative things, and we can talk about that for hours. But the implications of the announcement of those companies is potentially the best or the most positive thing that we are going to see for the future of work for many people, because a lot of those jobs are going to open up for people not only in the US, but for people in other countries. So we are seeing an avalanche already of interest on those potential jobs, but also on those companies learning, how do I go and hire people outside of San Francisco, outside of California, outside of the US? And as it's the case, we are already seeing, it's usually the case, we are already seeing companies outside of Silicon Valley already planning on doing that, on never going back to an office. So I completely agree with Freddy and some of the other comments in terms of the challenges of you having to be connected online and such. I'm really excited knowing that for many years, for millennia, right? If you had a business of some sort, people had to go to where the business was, right? People had to go to where companies were to be able to find work. In a matter of months, that's switching to be the opposite. Companies are going to where talent is, wherever that talent is. And that's, again, going to open up the opportunity for many, many, many people to find work that is more productive, pays better, and it's significantly more fulfilling than anything they could have dreamed in the past. Now, doing that matching, it's tricky. And recruiting of the future is not going to look like anything from the past. And we can discuss about the topic for hours if you like.
That's great. That's something that we'll pick up on in a few minutes. That's a good point to go. But on that point, I mean, it's great to see this transformation. The focus that we have here is, the youth and that they're coming right now out of universities and they're looking for jobs and specifically in the MENA region that we're focusing on. So it's what's interesting is would like to hear from each one of your perspective of what universities teach and what's the the market demand for skills. They're wide apart. The graduate, there's even universities in the best countries that are not keeping up with the fast changing demands of the skill and the fast changing curves of technology and everything else. So how do we bridge this gap? How do you see this gap that could be bridged from the traditional education to the skills needed for to prepare people for jobs? Maybe I want to start from with you, Haneen. Like I said, it's you're the closest to this demographic, to understanding it, to see it. What's your thought on that?
Well, it is a bit of a complex question because we're talking about higher education in a country where there's a lot of bureaucracy. The government is involved in the curriculums that are being taught. They need to be accredited through a council that is hired by the Ministry of Higher Education, for example, and it takes years to transform curriculum. If I take the example of the business curriculum in Jordan, it is being taught in a very traditional way, where you finish 4 years of education, for example, at a university, and you're very disconnected from what the market is looking for. You study in very theoretical classrooms. You're being taught by professors who have never worked on the business in their life and being told what it means to be an entrepreneur or a business owner. That's one. So there's a huge gap between education and the private sector. They're not taking into consideration when designing the curriculum what the private sector is looking for, what the market needs are. And there are certain streams still being taught that have no market anymore. We are oversaturated in engineering in Jordan, and we have a very big, huge gap and lack of people who have vocational skills, for example. And this is where the focus needs to shift towards. We also have the social stigma, where there's a lot of social acceptance towards certain streams of education versus others. A doctor or an engineer is more well respected in the society, even if he doesn't have a job for 3 or 4 years, rather than someone who does a vocational job. So it's an effort that needs to be carried out by development organizations such as SPARK, but in collaboration with the government, with the private sector. And there needs to be a huge campaigning to shift the way people look at vocational jobs.
Very interesting. Freddy, from your point of view, how do you see this gap? I mean, in Latin America, like I said, it's a similar culture. There's a lot of different developmental similar stages. How is this gap been bridged from? What have you seen Platzi is doing to basically fill that gap? Is my assessment here.
Of course. The reason why we focus on technology is because it was the area that had the strongest demand, regardless of the background of the candidate. I'm sure that Alex can elaborate on that further later, but in our regions, traditionally, you had two kinds of people, those who went to college and poor people. In Latin America, only 12% of people in the age or conditions, like between 16 to 25, so anybody that had graduated high school and then has been out of high school for 7 years, only 12% of those have access to college education. Everybody else can't. And it's because that's as many seats as we have in terms of universities. However, there is a definitely class divide between those that were able to attend college and those that didn't. Nowadays, if you think about it, if you want to go to college, that means that you have to sacrifice income for 5 years or sacrifice your life for 5 years. Because some people try to do it while juggling a job at the same time, and it gets extremely, extremely hard. I remember that I was studying software engineering, and at the same time, I started my first company, and it was just impossible. I had to make a choice, and I had to drop out back then because otherwise I will have to give up my company. It was absolutely, and it was like silly, easy company back then, like very tiny, but it was absolutely impossible with the level of workload that I had to just study. And that is the reality for many. And then there's the other reality that Hanin mentioned a minute ago. Even if you go to really great schools, there is this, there are just old skills. I mean, some skills are forever. Some skills are skills that you will always have for life. But in practical terms, if you right now go to, imagine that it's 2006 and you sign up for, again, software engineering. In 2007, Apple launched the iPhone. Because of the way that college is designed, the student that started at 2006 will never get to learn about mobile application development because their curriculum will be frozen for the next 5 years for regulation issues. When you couple lack of access with lack of advanced knowledge and talent, you see a huge problem. And that's part of the reason why in our regions, it's rare for our graduates to create technology. We are preparing a generation of consumers and a generation of people that can implement technology from others, but cannot develop technology on their own. The positive side of things is that this is changing, and this is changing really fast. But it's definitely not changing because of government regulation or because of a change in the institutions. It's changing because the market changed, because now programming is easier than ever. The same as it is learning design, learning finance. Let me take you to a different topic, which is accounting. Nobody thinks, well, some people do, but mostly nobody thinks that accounting is sexy. Accounting is something that is like the same for the past 10 years. But in the past 10 years, something called GAAP, US GAAP, General Accepted Accounting Practices, happen in accounting. So in the past, if you were an accountant, you knew that your job was safe because you were learning the laws of your country regarding to accounting. But now that most of the planet is moving to US GAAP, suddenly you will be fighting with accountants from the US, accountants from Mexico, accountants from India, accountants from Singapore, whose skills are equivalent. So we are seeing a new generation of people that have noticed this and that decided to take control, people that are lifelong learners. And we're also seeing, as Alex mentioned, a new generation of companies that realize that your socioeconomic background and the place where you study doesn't matter as much as what you are able to do and the people that can vouch for you. That combination of social network and skills that you can show through a portfolio, through your work, is very powerful. And it will take a while, but I'm very positive about it because I'm pretty sure that thanks to the pandemic, the companies that don't adapt to this will die really fast. And the companies that accept this new reality are going to grow faster than ever. We will probably see the next trillionaire company from a company that was started in this pandemic, and it will probably not be from the US. That's exciting.
Yeah, I would love to see that. That's a dream to see that bigger winners coming from different part of the world. Alex, you have something to add or Fahad on this topic? Please jump in on just how do we bridge in these gaps here between the education to the skill needed as well. You're muted again.
Sorry, I don't want to create unwanted noise. I'm very opinionated in the topic, but I think that's part of our responsibility as an entrepreneur. I think that we should forget about universities.
Yeah.
You like many people say, yeah, but like, don't you want the person that built your building to have a degree on civil engineering? No, I don't. What I want is to make sure that the person pass a test on civil engineering and that it abides by the laws that are required to be able to build a safe building. If the person
or have customers, like Freddy said, have voucher people who vouch for them that they know how to build buildings, and there's credibility in there.
Exactly. So, and I believe that we are shifting heavily. And by the way, part of what we develop in Toro.co is based out of that premise. We are shifting heavily from certification, vouching, and professional reputation being administered by institutions to that reputation being built by what others have to say about you, which to a large degree is potentially more valuable because institutions, in most cases, whenever they certify a person, what they are doing is I certify that this person learned about this topic. They cannot certify this person can do something about that knowledge, which other people can actually do. But I do believe that the future of education doesn't reside on, it resides on universities as much as the future of news resides on printed newspapers. It's for me. I invest on platforms. I'm also an angel investor. I like to invest in two-sided platforms, marketplaces that connect offer and demand. What the university is just the middle person between a professor and a student, between offer and demand. And that middle ground was based out of a building. And the same way that travel agents were replaced by digital websites, the same way that there are many other platforms that have replaced the way that we used to do things, I believe that there isn't a reason for universities to continue existing the way that they have. Now, there are going to be new universities. I believe that places like Platzi are the future of, but there are many other ways in which that can also work. And there are going to be some that are going to be able to migrate. But the most successful way of learning in the future is ongoing education all the time. The idea of you study for 20-30% of your life for you to be professionally productive for the other 70%, that's no longer going to work. Now it's a matter of investing on learning 20% of your time every single week so that you can keep up.
Great. Let's see. So I mean, the issue here with the digital skills that is being key. I mean, we've identified really there's something that is very hard. It's a different topic altogether, which is infrastructure, but there is this something with the digital divides and having access. So let's assume people have some sort of access to digital access. Where do we, how do we see? Is there challenges here in adopting and participating? Have you seen that kind of? I mean, I'm putting this question to all of you to see from your point of view. How has it been, to jump into this medium or modalities from the person who's teaching the skills, being pragmatic, practical skills for work, or being theoretical, educational, online for academic purpose. So there's the people who are delivering the knowledge, and there's the people who are consuming it. Has this been, what are some challenges in here to making this, facilitate that into, there's a lot of complexity goes into it to make it effective. I don't know who wants to jump in from.
I can quickly jump in there, and I think that more and more companies that are on the leading front of hiring are realizing that they don't necessarily have to hire based on experience or learn skills. They have to hire based on potential. So a significant responsibility that educational institutions have towards the future is not necessarily teaching the person a given skill, but teaching the person how to learn new skills, because many of those skills are going to be learned while working. Like, for example, in my company, we use a software development tool called Scala. Functional programming, it's really difficult. It's very difficult to find someone that knows that skill. A, because it's very difficult to learn, but B, because it's also not popular. It's not common for companies to have it. So I have to go out and look for people that I can predict are going to be fast learners and are recursive enough for them to be able to, within 2 weeks of learning in the company, be able to do it. Teaching people how to learn is potentially 50% of what we should be teaching people instead of the actual skills out there, especially today when you can go online and do a lot of self-learning.
Great.
If I may,
please
if I
go
may
ahead.
yes, based on our experience in our internship program, where we did a lot of collaboration with local chambers of commerce and industry in order to place young Jordanians between the age of 18 and 35 in jobs in the private sector, we found the biggest gap is the soft skills and interpersonal skills rather than the actual technical skill, because having the motivation, the dedication, someone who wants to learn is far more important when it comes to specific jobs than having the technical skill, because you can learn on the job. Even if you're a banker and you want to change banks and work in a new bank, you're going to learn a new technical skill or work on a new software. But it's about what interpersonal skills you bring as a person. And that's where we don't see a lot of focus either in early childhood learning or even in higher education. That's where I see one of the largest gaps that almost every private sector company talks about here in Jordan.
So
Can
that's
I
interesting.
add to that?
Yeah, please go ahead.
I know from personal experience that my own degree in developmental economics didn't help me at all when I got. I agree very, very much with what Alex is saying. It helped me, of course. It made me good at maths and had those skills. But I think the things actually that taught me the most were actually learned from misbehaving and doing the things that I wasn't supposed to be doing. It was from talking, finding what people found funny, what annoyed people. And it's, as you said, these kind of interpersonal skills. But this is where I think maybe I'll disagree with what Alex said a little bit earlier as well. This is where there is also a place for university, because there is, of course, a long history of academia that teaches us about how we learn. My master's was in cognitive science, and there was lots of people doing really great work. Now, where I think we both would agree on that is that the method of how universities are set up can diverge and they can be different. I mean, the fact is that, as you said, it's just about what we get out at the end of it. Now, the question is, how do we capture those difficult skills in terms of online learning when, of course, we understand that the biggest challenge is that maybe you're not sat in the room with other people? Are there now different kinds of interpersonal skills that we need to pick up from there? I know for example, I'm an avid user of Reddit. That's a community in and of itself. And so it's about trying to really figure out how these things interact. But then the key thing that's most often overlooked is really trying to make sure that we can prepare teachers to transmit that information. Because I think a lot of the time the students are the ones who are the most clued in. They understand the way that this new online world is going more so than a lot of the teachers do. So are we putting enough effort in to preparing teachers to be able to share these skills? And I think that's something that's often, most often being overlooked in this conversation.
Yeah, it's a great point, and this is really kind of leads to this next question to Freddy about when you have this broad range of subjects and topics and skills that Platzi offered. I'm assuming that the delivery here and the expertise is not coming necessarily from academic. It's coming almost from similar, like the people who are teaching the coding skills and things like that. They're not the traditional computer science teachers that are professors at the universities, right? Can you elaborate and tell us a little bit about, how did you do it? Because this is something needs massaging to bring it into the market.
Yeah, of course. The biggest issue with online education is that it doesn't work. How many courses have you tried that have you actually finished? It's very low. The average completion rate of the industry is 8%. Of 100 people starting an online course, only 8 finish the course. At Platzi, we have a 70% completion rate, an order of magnitude better. The reason for that is because first, we decided, we started from fundamental principles. How do people learn online? Like what a minute ago Fahad was mentioning. Most people learn online through communities, through tutorials, and through very specific skills that they're looking for. I don't go online to say, today I'm going to be a civil engineer because I'm really into bridges. I really want to build a bridge. That basically doesn't happen. People probably think, I have a business and I want to do Facebook ads or Google ads. to start selling for my business. How do I start with that? That's how most people have a skill. Something that we have found constantly is that from a very early age, we get hammered this idea that we need to pick the right career because the career will define you. And then you are 18, you don't know anything about anything, and you're like, oh my God, do I have to be a doctor? All right, I'm going to be a doctor now. And then through the first time that you see like surgery, you're like, why did I want to become a doctor? I'm really not into this. I want to be an artist. And that's totally fine. My guess is that now, more than ever, and thanks to the pandemic, we're going to see people having an intersection of skills, a wide variety of different skill sets, because they will be pursuing at the very same time their passion, and that gives them money. That's the tricky thing. How do I get paid for what I love to do? And that's what we started to pursue at Platzi. How do we create the smallest possible expression of the combination between what people love and what gives them money? And that's why we started with technology, with programming, because programming is probably the easiest career to get a job regardless of your background. But there are many more than this. We found, for example, about interactive design and illustration. Anything related to digital design, basically your actual title is your Instagram account or your online portfolio. It's very rare that people are like, oh, you graduated from the University of blah, blah, blah in graphic design. That means nothing. Show me what you have done. And that has been true for graphic design for decades. And then the same happens with marketing. Marketing has this. Have you just do this as an exercise later? Try to check the curriculum of the average marketing career at an actual legit university. It's mind-blowing. They still believe that we live in a world of federated media where you have to negotiate with the radio and TV and stuff like that. And they're not teaching things like customer acquisition costs, lifetime value, churn rate, click-through rates. Some do. And some universities don't think that they should do this. Some universities think my job here is to teach people how to think so that they can find out for themselves, which is awesome, but then you're probably very expensive for that objective. The objective of universities is to research. The objective of universities, the original objective, is to push humans' knowledge forward, to create new knowledge, especially in areas of basic research, of basic science, where corporations or governments will not do it. And thanks to that, we have a very powerful species that dominate this planet. But that's why we cannot manage universities as businesses. And that's why universities that are handled as businesses are having a very hard time now on the pandemic, because that's the objective of the university. What did Platzi do? We took those skills, we made them as short, concrete, and focused as possible. We packaged them in the way that people actually learn online. For example, we have classes that you take vertical, like Instagram stories. We have classes that are audio only, like podcasts. We have classes that are interactive projects in a community, like Reddit. That's how we teach. And also, we optimize the use of bandwidth for very low internet connectivity. YouTube, for example, uses 5 megabits per second to stream 720p video. But the average connection in Latin America is under 5 megabits per second. So we optimize our video to have very high quality, but we only use 0.7, less than a fifth of what YouTube uses. That way we can reach people in the Amazon, in the countryside, or just people that are commuting from place to place before, when commuting was a thing, before the pandemic, of course. That's the thing that we did. And the next thing that we did, and
what is commuting? Commuting what?
Commuting. It's a thing of the past. People
used to do that, right?
Yeah, they got together in like a big car and they were all close together. It's good old memories, man. Good old memories. Before the virus wars. The last thing that we do is, and this surprised me. It took us 3 years of operations to discover this. We do a lot, and I mean a lot, of emotional support for our students, because online students are extremely fragile. They think that they will never get a job. They think that they're not good enough. They have the biggest imposter syndrome that you can ever imagine. So part of our job is basically to tell them, you can do it. These are your opportunities. It doesn't matter that you were born in poverty. It doesn't matter that you think you were born in the wrong country. The world is different and you can do it, and we will let you know how. That emotional support took us a while to discover, and it's part of the 70% completion rate.
That's very interesting. It's a really good point. To bring us to the next point also, I mean, from the angle of, all of the cross industries collaborators, that they need to come together to move this learner into the job as well. There is learning and acquiring the skills, but then, like Freddy said, translating, learning to earning, and going to to the money. And I'm curious, Haneen, from your point of view, with the great results that you guys have done in the past couple of years with Spark of all of the job creations and all of this. What did that take, and how did it work to collaborate with the private sector, and how did entities have to come together to make this happen? And could you tell us a little more about that?
Yeah, it is challenging. I'm not going to say it's not challenging. It takes a very long time to build a trusting relationship with universities that are a little bit isolated and work in a different mechanism than, for example, the private sector. It's always easier to work with the private sector directly and pilot something, and then it becomes easier to lure in educational institutions and the government, people that are a little bit more traditional and hard to convince. That's one. Number two, it's what I found to be extremely interesting is the emotional support point that you just mentioned. It's a lot of effort, listening and adjusting and coaching. So for example, if I give the example of the entrepreneurship program, training without coaching doesn't work. You need to coach people simultaneously as you train them. Traditional 15-day training courses, classrooms filled with people, are not as focused, are not as interesting, and are not as productive. It's a combination of multiple things. It's the peer-to-peer, the one-on-one experience, as well as the emotional support part of it. We were recently building another scaled-up version of our internship program, and we specifically, on purpose, built in inside the program, the matching component. We built in a component of mentors, career mentors, where people who have gone through internship programs can yet again create the same support to people who are entering new internships. It's a lot of important issues, and specifically if you're talking about Syrian refugees, where we're talking about people who are not allowed to work in every sector, are not welcomed in some host communities, within certain communities, because there's this competition between the host communities and Syrian refugees, and they need a lot of support. And there's a bit of a cultural gap. Even though we're neighboring countries, there is a bit of a cultural gap. So I find the emotional point very important.
Yeah, I mean, you're pointing to two things here: the emotional support on a personal level to motivate the learner to persevere and get the job and move through the learning. There is also the cultural differences with the various cultures and the work ethics and work habits. How have you seen this, Alex? With you got a new participant there. How do you see this from having done some matching that you have talents from different countries and working with companies and different cultures? Has this been something that you had to handle?
Yeah, talking about job culture, something that I'm loving about COVID, a small parenthesis there, is that I'm getting to meet the children of many of the investors that I'm talking to, many of the clients, and I love that. I think that we are shifting from the mentality of work-life balance, where we see life and work on two different sides of the spectrum, and instead getting into work-life integration, which I believe should be the way to go, because work should be part of what fulfills your life as a whole. So going back to the question that you mentioned, that's a big challenge, especially as we see more and more jobs being open to people anywhere. As we see cross-border opportunities, there are multiple things that need to be addressed. For example, in the case of Latin America, a software engineer that speaks English can expect to earn 3 times more than a software engineer that doesn't speak English. Why? Because the software engineer that speaks English is going to be able to tap into job openings by companies that are targeting global markets, North America and such. If you only speak Spanish, then you're limited your job market to companies in Latin America, potentially that are creating technology exclusively for the Latin American sector. And even then, that doesn't even include Brazil, right? So that's a very valuable skill. Someone asked me if it was up to you, what would you do to make Colombia more competitive? I'm Colombian. I say 2 things: A, internet access for all, what Freddy mentioned. 2, education should be in English. So that we become part of that global competitive market. Now, there are many details that vary from culture to culture, language to language, even city to city, that because we tend to be surrounded by people similar to us, we don't even realize that we might be missing that out. For example, in the case of Latin America, punctuality is a big thing, meaning it's on punctuality, sorry, it's a big thing.
Right. Being late, Latin time, yeah.
Yeah, so like, when I invite friends here in the US to an event and inviting some Latin people that have not been living in the US for long, I tell them the meeting is at 5 p.m. or 4 p.m. Latin time, meaning that I expect for them to get an hour late because that's what's custom. So, but when it comes to work, like you cannot arrive 2-3 minutes late to a video conference interview. You have to be there 1-2 minutes late, and that's just one out of many things. So one of the things that we are doing now, so that's a big thing. Now, on the other hand, one of the things that I believe we as technologists, especially technologists here in Silicon Valley, should be ashamed of is that even though we have some great engineers working on optimizing ads, as someone here mentioned, we wanted flying cars, and all they gave us was 140 characters. So we have a lot of manpower working on things that are not that valuable for society. Yet today, most people that apply to a job, they have no idea why they didn't get hired. Right? The average is almost 99% globally. 99 out a job opening in average gets 100 applicants, and they hire one, and 99% of them, 99 people, they are not hired, and most of them by far have no idea why they were not hired. So we are at Toro, actually, I'm pushing many other companies to try to do this, to make that process transparent. Teach the person why is that you were not a good match. What are the factors that you need to improve? How do you compare to other candidates in there? And this is what you have to learn. And what's interesting is that experience and education is only a tiny part of that. How many years you have worked at something and how many years you study something is one of the factors. But companies also pay attention to your professional culture. Punctuality, for example, your personality traits. Are you an introvert? Are you an extrovert? What are your aspirations? How does your network of contacts look like? Did you have a grammar mistake in your profile, etc., etc.? So all of those things are subtle. And what's the most interesting is that that analysis can be automated and automatically exposed. So I believe that there is going to be a huge merge in terms of the future of jobs and the future of education, because education and work have to match. And there is a huge gap in terms of what people need to have to be able to get hired and what people are being taught. And the job market is what triggers that demand. And determines what's needed, but there has been a huge disconnect. That, thanks to technology, is shortening now. The challenge is people, governments, institutions, leaders, they need to pay attention to that and implement it and have a global perspective instead of just a local perspective in terms of what they should be teaching their people.
That's a really interesting key point here. Just quickly, I wanted to bring this to Fahad's perspective here. When you have an organization like the Qatar Fund for Development that has a global perspective about humanitarian efforts and economic developments and general things to improve quality of life, how do you see an organization with like the resources that we're talking about here needed, that we need to bring potentially infrastructure change, are such an organization like QFFD and others, are they seeing in the depth of these issues? Are they willing to dive into the details of where they want to deploy support and resources?
Yes, of course. I mean, this is actually something that's kind of been jumping around my head a lot while we've been talking, is that our focus is always on the most vulnerable. And I mean, I spend a lot of my time in really rural areas of West Africa and around the MENA region, where a lot of these conversations, I mean, it's hugely important, the things that we're talking about right now, because this is the revolution, this is where it's going. But it's just something that's not even crossing the minds of hundreds of millions of people in rural Africa, for example. However, what is critical and what we see as critical at QFFD is ensuring a social safety net for these people, and ensuring that they have these access through partners like SPARK, for example, ensuring that they have access to these sort of soft skills that are adaptable, and also working on the sort of infrastructural divide, working on that digital divide to make sure that they do have access. As you said, I totally agree. At the beginning, Freddie said that you're kind of like a new creature if you have access to a phone. So it's really about, like, we're focusing on how to get that to those people is what we're thinking about. Just some really key points is that even when we do have access, for example, if we do have access to these sites like you're talking about with job matching, and we are having this shift in what we understand to be the technological economy, we really need to think, I think, we can learn from the humanitarian perspective here. There's like some real huge challenges that come alongside that we've been dealing with, of course, in the world of humanitarian aid for a long time, where if people are working from home and people are getting these kind of skills and things like that from home, often they have kind of a lack of a family support system around them to be able to help them and aid in their learning. Lots of these people were actually getting food from educational institutions. For example, I think UNESCO released data last week saying 368 million people in Africa, children in Africa now, are no longer receiving food from their schools, from school feeding programs. So like and also we've seen from COVID as well, this huge growth in domestic violence, which is terrifying. And of course, when this is around the most vulnerable, women and children, this is something that we really need to worry about. So what we need to consider when we're talking about all of this is making sure that we're not just targeting these youth or whoever we're trying to match up to these jobs, but the entire community and the families around them, because everyone needs to really feel comfortable with what's going on in order to support them. And it's really important that we sort of remember that human face to this technological revolution.
Great. So let's see, we only got a couple of more minutes left here at a time to see if there's any questions that we should address here that they're posed. Do you guys see any question? Do you want to jump into any of them? Any of you could take any. And as we do this, maybe just a general advice here for, let's say, a 20-year-old woman in Jordan, or in maybe a Syrian refugee in Lebanon. They may be enrolled right now at the university, but there's a lot of demands that they would rather probably be earning a living while they're learning. There's the need that they could be supporting other things. What do they, what is the practical advice here? Where they should go to? Platzi is in Latin America language right now, and what are the likes of the directions or Torres that they could put build their profile on, or
yeah, of course.
Or Spark, they go to, yeah.
I think that in short, my advice is realize that the career that you choose doesn't define you and that you will probably have 3, 4, 5 careers in your life. So learn to learn fast.
Okay, that's great. And how could someone how do they reach to Spark here or to you, Haneen, and Region if they don't know? How is this message could be, like what are the things that they may be not aware of that they could approach and helping them with jobs, not through a specific program in general?
In general, what I think I can say a takeaway from such a diverse talk, for example, is how can we learn from what's done at Platzi and other platforms? How can we innovate or even replicate an experience and customize it to our own culture? Why don't we come up with something that can be replicated here? I don't need to go and knock on every door to find a job. I can be at the comfort of my home and be doing multiple jobs. Gig economy in itself is one of the very few windows for Syrian refugees to work in Jordan. Specifically, the IT sector in a company is not open to a Syrian refugee, but a Syrian talented designer who is able to show his portfolio online is able to sell his talent. And that's the reality of the world. Gig economy is one of the very few windows available. And that's where we need to take an opportunity. Where people can find Spark, we're everywhere, hopefully. We're also partners with a lot of local private organizations and the government, multiple government institutions, educational institutions. So it's not only Spark, it's a whole movement that needs to take place. But what I find interesting is that it took us until COVID hit to understand that traditional jobs as we know them are over. And as we now get out of a lockdown, I look at a lot of moms who are now, even though they are able to return to work, are unable to leave their children at home because we don't have any schools and universities. So whether they like it or not, the private sector is going to have to deal with working remotely and managing people remotely. And that's a new set of skills for people who are used to very traditional ways of management. So it's multiple things on multiple levels, but what I see is the interesting experience of 70% success rate of finishing online courses. That's a dream to someone who works in a country like Jordan, where people barely up to, if you have 8% in other platforms in Latin America, I'd say 5% or less finish online courses in Jordan. But the reality now is that people need that, whether they like it or not. It's the way we present it and the way we customize it and the way we make it our own.
Mm-hmm. And any other approach that a person of that sort of profile that they could take small steps and in progressing, like moving things together, the education and preparing themselves for career, preparing themselves for exposure on social media, building their own little portfolio of whatever photography skills or whatever. Do you have any advice on that, Alex, in terms of like preparing for building these kind of personal profile for professional development?
Yes, I believe that I've seen a lot of recruiting is moving into AI. So it's machine making decisions, which, by the way, we are used to seeing AI already telling us what we have to do. Google is a good example of that. It's AI all the way. So make sure that whichever platform you end up signing up, and chances are you will want to have multiple profiles in multiple different platforms. Profiles in multiple platforms. You provide as much data as you can, because the more data you provide, the higher the reputation that you build in those platforms, the higher the likelihood that you're going to be found. If you're shy, if you don't want to invest a significant amount of time in there, then you're not going to be found. And so invest time doing it and be data driven about it. You can go to Toro.co. You can look for jobs that are remote and open to people living in your country, and it is going to show you which are the most popular skills, and try to match what you love or what you think you might love with those skills, and how much those skills are also paying, so that you can make a better decision in terms of what to focus on at the moment. just to give a contrarian perspective, I actually don't think it's bad that that the average completion rate of courses online is 8%. Because I see it not as a glass that is half empty. I see it as a glass that is half full. That means that a lot of people are exploring knowledge that they potentially had no significant interest on, and they see it and they realize, okay, maybe this is not for me. I'm going to do something else. I don't think what we should be measuring is the percentage of classes that people start and finish, is the overall number of classes that people are finishing on a monthly basis. If I start 20, but for as long as you finish one per month, for example, that's great, because that means that the person is learning to learn. It's exploring. Yeah, I'd be happy to answer more questions to people on my profile. If they want to, you can follow me on Twitter on @torrenegra. That's my last name, and I can give some additional tips to whomever wants to.
Thank you, Alex. Yeah. Thank you, everybody. It's been a really great and very enriching session, and great insights and great input. Just to summarize, I could see that this is like the initiative has to be self-driven, that the student, the learner, they need to jump in. It is key to kind of learning that language skills. There's also another other essential knowledge element is to have the access, the digital access. And most important is to have the support around you, that the people who are going to encourage you and believe in you. It's great that this could be built into some of these platforms and built into some of the organizations that's supporting this education. So thank you all for a very, very great session. It's been an honor and pleasure to be with all of you. And now we have to end. And thanks again for everybody who joined us. All right.
Thank you.
Cheers, everybody.
Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Stay safe. Stay well.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.